Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special live webinar brought to you by the Early Childhood Australia Learning Hub. My name is Catharine Hydon, and it's fantastic to be here. I can see that many of you are joining us, so thank you very much for taking a bit of time in your very busy days to be a part of our conversation today. We'd like to begin, as we do in Early Childhood Australia's opportunities like this, any learning opportunities, to pause for a moment and acknowledge the traditional owners on whose country we are all collectively on. I'm here on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi people in southern Queensland, and I particularly want to take time here to acknowledge the traditional owners and the ways in which they have cared for country and have supported us to communicate and understand the importance of growing and learning and the spiritual connection to country that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have shared with us over many, many years. Particularly also want to acknowledge that this land was never ceded and that we are continuing every day in the work of Early Childhood Australia to understand what it means to restore justice and equality for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across this nation. We also really acknowledge the fact that we've had some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues joining us today, and we particularly acknowledge their work in this space. And we hope that all of us from the non-Indigenous community can stand in allyship at this important time. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As you can see, the chat is beginning to go off. So thank you very much for saying hello. Please take a moment if you would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose country you are on today, and recognise that we stand on pedagogical giants' shoes there, on shoulders, I should say, to thank them for the contribution that they have made to your understanding of what it means to teach and learn on country. So today is a conversation between myself and two really well-regarded colleagues in the early childhood community here in Australia, Joe Goodwin and Adam Duncan. Now, many of you will have met Adam and Joe in various symposiums or opportunities, and this is going to be a conversation with them about the changes to the Australian Constitution to recognise First Peoples of Australia by establishing a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. So, of course, as many of you know already, but again, we shouldn't assume that everybody knows all sorts of things. So we welcome very important sort of fundamental questions in this conversation. There will be a referendum held on the 14th of October this year, 2023. And the question that will be put to the voters is whether to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. And if you want to know more information about the process of a referendum, some of you actually weren't around the last time, and also maybe some of you have never been involved in a referendum vote before. So we really encourage you to have a look at all of the details that are available through the Electoral Commission, and there's some information there that tells you factual information about that process, and we really encourage you to go and have a look at that, including things like where to vote and how to vote. So being a part of that information is available on the Australian Electoral Commission's website. Early Childhood Australia has publicly declared in various places, you'll see it on the social media platforms as well as through communication directly to members, its full support of their voice to Parliament. And we are collectively, as members, very proud of the active involvement of Early Childhood Australia and our members in supporting the Yes campaign. We believe that this is a step towards a reconciled nation, something that Early Childhood Australia has been working on over many, many years, which is an important legacy for Australian children. ECA's vision for reconciliation, which you can find detailed in the reconciliation action plans on our website, is that every young child has the opportunity to thrive and learn in nations that value and respects and celebrates Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing and being. And you can read more about the commitments that we've made over these last years in the Early Childhood Australia Reconciliation Action Plan. The aim of this webinar is to hear from two of, as I said, our respected colleagues, and for us to have a conversation together about this important time. So before I keep going, let's actually welcome our two guests. Adam, good afternoon. Very good to see you. And Joe, great to see you too. But perhaps, Adam, we can start with you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from?
Sure. Weeaboo, everyone. I'm Adam Duncan. I'm a beer pie man. I'm a director of a service in the ACT on beautiful Ngunnawal Ngambri country.
Thanks, Adam. And Joe, hello.
Hello, hi. I'm Jingiwala. I'm on the land of the Kudjambara people today. I am a descendant from the Wanneroo people in the Upper Hunter in New South Wales. And I also need to acknowledge that the discussion that we're having today, any of my input that I have is strictly my own thoughts and opinions and not affiliated with anyone that I have any professional ties with. This is all my thoughts.
Thanks, Joe, for clarifying that. And of course, many people who are joining us today from all parts of Australia, and a big shout out to the people who are joining us and different time zones and getting all of that right. We'll have probably heard from Adam and Joe on the podcast that's available for many of our members and friends to listen to. And you may well have seen them present in professional learning context. So fantastic to have you both here. As I said, this is a conversation. We wanted to really open up a conversation and talk together about the referendum and what it means for us as professionals. So maybe we can go straight to that conversation, Joe and Adam, is to ask about why we should pay deep attention to this. So I'm an early childhood professional. Why should I particularly pay regard to this, wearing that professional hat? And what should I think about the process of being involved in a referendum, particularly this one that focuses on a voice to Parliament as an early childhood professional? Adam, do you want to kick us off? Why is it so important?
Well, I mean, it feels like a bit of an obvious answer, first and foremost, Catherine, but the fact that this decision is going to quite profoundly impact the children that we're working with for the foreseeable future, one way or another. I think it's incredibly important that we are able to provide an informative and well-informed front when it comes to working with children and families on this issue. Because, first and foremost, it's going to be impacting them directly.
Yeah, well, it's a great way to sort of position it in such a fundamental connection to the children and families that we work with every day. So, Joe, for you, why does this matter to us as early childhood professionals?
Look, because I think it's this is a rare opportunity that we have, that we've been invited into to start a dialogue, to ask ourselves, do we actually accept and want to hear and include the voice of ourselves, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of this country, and do we want to ensure that that voice will be heard for generations to come, and that children, particularly our First Nations children, our children that are tomorrow's leaders, that they have this space and what word am I looking for? The space and the opportunity in which to really influence things that impact on us as Aboriginal people.
And I think I'm also really thinking about the commitments that we've made over now numbers of years. I mean, both of you have been around early childhood education for a little while now, and you've seen the growing commitment that our colleagues have made to incorporating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives into our everyday curriculums. And of course, we now have an updated early years learning framework that really speaks very strongly about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children having, equal life chances, and all children having the opportunity to learn about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. I feel like, I don't know what your thoughts are, I feel like there is a big push from our colleagues to say this matters. This matters to us in terms of our pedagogical understanding. We want this to be part of who we describe ourselves as in terms of the everyday teaching and learning opportunities. Am I hearing the right thing there, Adam?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Catherine. I think the fact that we have had the refreshed early years learning framework, with that doubling down on the importance of Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous voices within our pedagogy and our practice, I think it's a really good indication that as a profession, early childhood educators are ready to kind of have this conversation, and hopefully it's a good indicator of where we will be heading in the next little while.
What about you, Joe? Am I reading the room right in terms of the sort of the sense from educators?
Yeah, look, I think that it's true. We do have this commitment, and we have this keenness and this curiosity about how do I do this? How do I do this best? How can I make those links? And probably one of the biggest things that is happening right now is this opportunity to ensure that our Aboriginal people, ourselves, and children and generations to come have a voice that provides guidance to the government of the day, whomever that government may be, to ensure that we are listened to and the things that impact on us nationally and across every part of Australia are there. There is good things that come out of having a voice.
And Joe, maybe we should talk a little bit about that in terms of our collective sort of awareness. And this is one of the reasons why maybe also it matters for early childhood professionals, because of what we know is happening for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children across Australia. In 2023, the life chances, the life expectancy outcomes are not as good as they should be. And we still are failing children, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, in many, many ways. And we know a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And I feel like this is of grave importance to us as professionals, because what happens to children matters, and we make an ethical obligation to children in our code of ethics, as well as, of course, our guiding principles and the National Quality Standard. But is that also why it matters, because of what we know?
Oh, absolutely. We have a policy, and it's called Closing the Gap. That policy exists because we don't have equality, we don't have equity in our life trajectories. It's one of those things that happen, and there's a legacy of policies, dispossession, all since colonisation, that have impacted on us as First Nations people in this country, and we need to ensure that we get it right, because we've had now 200 plus years of successive governments trying to do for us with the best of intents, but continuing to fall short. As we saw, the Closing the Gap stats for 2021 were 65.7% of Aboriginal children start school developmentally vulnerable. That's significantly high. And that tells us that what we currently have in place is still not meeting the needs of our children. And it possibly could still be, I'm not saying it is, but it still could be that Western parenting normative lens is still being applied to the work in which how governments are thinking about policy. And all of that, when you think about the voice, that guidance would be provided directly into the government of the day, so that policies and investments and things are actually going to hit the mark in the first instance.
Adam, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I don't think I have much to add. I think I have had some really eye-opening experiences recently that have drawn my attention back to some of those outcomes that we know Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are struggling to kind of to the trends they're trying to buck when it comes to their health, education, and other outcomes. Was lucky enough to go along to the Songs of Freedom show and listen to the Roburn community members that are traveling around Australia as part of that project. And Youth incarceration is another one that is a huge issue. I think the ultimate message is, echoing what Joe said, I feel like we really have to latch on to the idea, or grasp the idea, that something different has to be our next attempt, because the things that we have in place at the moment are clearly not working. If they haven't worked in, if we've been doing the same thing for 200 plus years, and we're here now, maybe it's time to try something different.
Mm. And for me, it sounds to me like we have to come back to some really very fundamental ethical principles here, which we're going to talk about now. Is that, if one of them is that people are heard and recognised and seen, and we pay attention to people who are different from us, and that we understand what it means to have privilege, etc., then it's about nothing about us without us. It's about fundamentally, we talk about this with children all of the time. We talk about children's right to be consulted in matters that affect them. Children's agency is all over this. I feel like we're taking a commitment that we've made for young children, and we're thinking about what this means from a whole community perspective. So if we do go into that sort of ethical obligation, we've got this giant referendum. Lots of people maybe pay a little bit of attention to some of the political conversations. Some people pay a lot of attention. We have a big commitment within Early Childhood Australia to a ethical way of practicing as professionals. So what is my ethical obligation in relation to this referendum, Adam? Like, what ought I be doing?
Well, we've been talking about this, Catherine, offline a bit, but I think first and foremost, I'd like to suggest that you have an ethical obligation to be informed. Mm-hmm. Perhaps counter to the rhetoric that's going around regarding the if you don't know, vote no, mm-hmm. Slogan. I think we have an ethical obligation to find out. If you don't know, find out. Entering into any kind of political conversation, any political situation where you're ill-informed, is the outcome is not going to be a viable one. I think going into any vote ill-informed is a bad idea. And so I think the first and foremost, our ethical obligation to find out what we can before we make that our choice is probably most important from my perspective.
And it's one of the reasons we're here, is to share ideas and thoughts with our colleagues in a spirit of collegiality, and wanting to be part of that information and feeling like you're part of the conversation. Joe, for you, what is our sort of most important ethical obligation in this referendum as professionals?
Look, ethical obligation is in relation to respect, but I think respect's very difficult to define, because respect can mean so many different things to different people who think that they're being respectful when in the eyes of another person. So I probably want to go to a value, and I think empathy is the value that we need to be bringing into this conversation. And of course, within ethics, we also need to have empathy and understanding. And I think in the past, I just think about Paul Keating's Redfern Park speech back in the day, when he said, if we can imagine these injustices, if we fail to imagine this happening to us, then we cannot progress with this. And I'm wondering how well we're being empathetic, how are we applying that empathy lens. I think Kevin Rudd also did that when he was apologising. He sort of talked about, if we are to progress this, we need to acknowledge this and understand and have empathy. And look, when I was sort of thinking today about what's been my biggest, lightning bolt moment, probably in the past 12 months, I think, was when I was reading something from Closing the Gap, where they said one of the first initiatives was to ensure that all communities have running water and electricity. And if I ever needed to think about do we need a voice? Do we have empathy? Do we have understanding? Then that's probably the biggest reality check that I can offer up, is that we have some of our and some of our early learning services operating without running water and electricity in some of our more remote communities. And, that's probably one of the biggest things that I think a voice to Parliament brings, is it actually makes those lack of what we think are fundamental resources front and centre and says, hey, no, let's get this sorted. Let's sure that we've got basic sanitation and running water in communities where children are as well. So I think it's about empathy and, that, yeah.
And I think too, it's maybe worthwhile for all of us to go back into the Early Childhood Australia Code of Ethics and look at that. And one of them that I keep coming back to is that we have an ethical obligation as educators to listen and learn from families. And the families that we're working with here on a national level are part of the people who wrote the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Their families, their children, they are speaking to us, and we have an obligation to listen. It is really, really important that we listen to the full spectrum of all the people who are sharing thoughts and ideas, and that we come to some understandings ourselves to inform us as we move forward, but also to make sure that we make decisions that uphold the rights and best interests of children as paramount, so that if we think this is going to change things and make things better, and I would agree with you, Joe, 2023, people, it's 2023. Can we think about doing something different into this space? I think the other thing too, Adam, you might want to comment on this because you're at a service, and you work with educators on a daily basis, is part of our ethical obligation to talk to each other about it, not to sort of remain silent and sort of and don't talk about some of those things with our colleagues. Do we have an obligation to sort of join in the conversation?
It's a tricky one for me, Catherine, honestly, because I think I agree with your statement that I think we put ourselves in a difficult situation if we can't have those conversations. That being said, speaking as an Aboriginal person working in a service with a very diverse team, it's not always necessarily the same. Like, I can understand a lot of services, a lot of communities having places that aren't particularly safe. I think the important thing to acknowledge in kind of addressing this and talking to this point is that the obligation, I think, comes with a bit of a caveat that we remain as safe as we can when we're having these conversations. I think we have, maybe my point is that we have an obligation to try and provide safe spaces in which to have these conversations more than an obligation to actually have them. And that's a hard thing, of course. We know how divided at the moment we are. The two camps are find it very hard to find common ground. So I think I think that's my point. I think we have a stronger obligation to try and provide a safe space in which to have the conversations rather than having them. Particularly speaking as an Aboriginal person, I think I have felt in various spheres it's quite risky to have these conversations openly.
Thanks for sharing that, Adam. And I think that's a very timely reminder for us all to, pause for a moment and think about our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues and how we can stand in allyship in this really challenging time. Joe, do you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what Adam is stating, and I think it's about maintaining curiosity. So if someone, and it has to be safe, and I have had multiple conversations, but they've been when someone's approached me, they've been one-on-one, or they've been when I've been in a group situation where I've just sort of checked in and people have no idea about what's going on or how important it is. So I stop and try to understand the worldview, like a different worldview, but also the importance of this this offering that is on the plate for every voting Australia. It's an offering to think of, to charter a different future, and if people can put that into perspective a bit and be curious, but it is difficult and it is challenging, and it's a simple proposition. This is a very simple proposition. Do you believe that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should have a voice to Parliament that supports whatever government of the day it is to guide on policies and investment things that directly impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples? That's the most simplest thing. For my mind, it's a very simple proposition that is out there.
No, and I guess, Jo, one of the things that we know is happening out there, and this happens in lots of different contexts too, but it's a particularly important conversation at the moment, is that some educators get a bit worried that they're becoming too political, and this goes to a conversation around whether indeed early childhood education is political, and whether we have a role in this conversation as early childhood professionals, because some people have said to me, well, the children that we work with don't vote. But what I've said to them is the children that we work with will inherit that vote. And I think that makes everything that we do extremely political, because, of course, they're all citizens. These children are citizens, and they are looking to the grown-ups around them to make wise decisions on their behalf. So Jo, your response to people who say, oh, it's a little bit political, Jo, we shouldn't be involved in that conversation?
I would suggest that children are our future leaders. Advocacy work, reflection, empathy. We talk about empathy, and we talk about kindness. I mean, every early learning centre is talking about kindness. So there is a really important lens in which you can talk about the voice through with your children, about understanding and kindness and wanting the best opportunities for children in this country. And I don't think that is, whilst it could be perceived as being political, it's about ensuring that we also allow our children to be as well informed as what they can be. And interesting, my great net, she was here for me for the weekend, and she's 8, and we started talking to her about yes and everything about yes. And then today she saw something. She goes, oh, yes, that's what you were talking about yesterday. She goes, tell me again what is yes about, and what is it all about? So it's about also encouraging children to be curious, because they then learn from being curious about things.
Adam, your thoughts on the political nature of early childhood? I know we've only got a short period of time to wax lyrical about this, but it's an interesting conversation.
I think early childhood education and care is highly political. I don't think we can separate the politics of the day from the work that we're doing. The kind of most basic example of that is the fact that children will be exposed to media coverage, whether that's the radio on the way to their service in the morning, or the news at night, or this kind of incidentally throughout the day, reading, hearing conversations from the adults in their lives, the people around them. We can't position ourselves as being in an environment that is isolated from that. And in regards to the argument that children aren't voting, I have experienced it myself within our learning community, the impact that children have on the way that their parents vote. If we can do the work, if we can put in the hard yards, and we can do the right thing by children, informing them of what's happening in their lives, which they will experience in one way or another, without us, we can impact. We can change the hearts and minds of the parents, even though they're not the ones sitting in the room with us. We can, and that, depending on your reading, that could sound a little on the sinister side. It sounds a little bit dodgy, me just saying it that way. But knowing how important this is and how vitally important it is that we get this right this time. I think it's an important thing to keep in mind, the fact that voices of children do count for a lot in the minds of their parents.
And I think too, it reminds me that the children we work with have an acute sense of fairness. This is one of the reasons why I think they have engaged with the stories that we've shared with them about colonisation in ways that are careful and age appropriate, that the children do understand that people were here before, and they have understood the story of removal and decolonisation, and they get the fairness element of it. They understand what is fair. And that goes for me for something very fundamental in terms of human, commitment to each other, and that maybe children have got a lot more of that, and we could sort of listen to them as they talk about what is fair and kind and respectful. And indeed, this goes to us equipping children to be part of dialogues that are safe and respectful and supportive in our whole community. We've got to, teaching them how to be good citizens that look out for each other in communities that care. And, everybody will be very mindful of the fact that we now have sustainability aspects that talk to social sustainability, which is about human beings getting on well together and looking for a sustainable future together. So there's lots of things in our frameworks and our thinking around early childhood education that really points us in this direction. Joe, I really like that notion of the simple proposition. I think this is what Early Childhood Australia has picked up on in their support, that it is a simple proposition for our children into the future. And I think there is a dialogue, which I want to come back to before we sort of start to wind up. There is a dialogue out there, which Adam mentioned before, which is about vote no if you're not sure, and that voting no will mean nothing changes. I think from an ECA perspective, that does concern us in the sense that it will change. If the vote is no, there is change. If the vote is yes, there is change. Change is something that we grapple with every single day. But I think we need to really sort of think about what it means to vote no, thinking that will be an unchanged landscape. Joan, do you want to respond to that?
Oh, yeah, voting no. It's a reality that I actually don't want to even contemplate, because what does that mean for us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country? What does that say to us about in what regard we're held, or where, the reality is that there's been, for anything to actually, I'm going to just diverge a tiny little bit here, sorry, but when you think of the things that we as Aboriginal people have had to fight for, and we have had to fight for this has all come from advocacy work. The 1967 referendum was done for years and years and years, run by a campaign of some of our most prominent elders, Charles Perkins, Faith Bandler, all of them hammering away at that to make that change. The Mabo, that started in 1982 with 5 local Miriam police. So we haven't, we fought for every tiny little bit of progress that has to happen in this country. It has not, nothing has ever been given to us. And I know there's lots of different theories about, Aboriginal people as pandered and to which is not true. So we are standing on the shoulders of some great warriors from before our times. They've done amazing work, and and I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, Adam.
Well,
do you want to jump in there with anything?
Yeah, Adam, do you want to jump in there? But it is to suggest that we say voting yes will change things, but so too will voting no.
Yeah, and I just want to say we're nowhere near completing that work. Like this is an offer to begin a new dialogue, and we're nowhere near where we need to be with that.
I think what you've just demonstrated for us, Joe, is that the biggest difficulty here is how invested, and going back to the empathy, the talk about empathy. I think it's really hard to empathize with someone who has a opinion other than, or a view other than your own, when something is so important and we are so invested in it. I mean, talk about skin in the game. I think the conversation about how it will change, my worry is that in the kind of dialogue, in the way that we've talked about this, and the way that it's been kind of where we're at right now, waiting for the date, is that the impact for each individual person in their own individual space and place in the landscape is so vastly different. We do have to work on coming to terms with what it means if we get a no result. I think you're right, Catherine. It does change. My concern, and I almost can't, similar to Joe, can't fathom what the change will be if we land on no. And I think it's important, as we've talked about before, it's important that we have a plan. Like the plan, the work doesn't stop, Joe. In fact, we just have to double down and work harder if we land on no. The work remains, the work continues if we get a yes vote, but it'll be a vastly different landscape, I think.
And I guess this is also a call for all of us at this time, with the commitments that Early Childhood Australia and many other organisations have publicly made to support the Yes campaign, is to talk to each other, think yourself, become informed about the work that is happening, and to come back to Joe's, and in fact what we know is being shared in various platforms around the simple proposition. One thing that I would urge everybody to do is to go back and reread the Uluru Statement from the Heart, because it helps you to understand what the call is to walk together into a different future. And it is about taking the time that we need, and I think this is fundamental to our ethical obligation. I think it is a tricky time for many of our colleagues here, and again, a big shout out to all of the allies out there in thinking about what you can do to walk alongside our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues, families and children at this time, but also to do the work as citizens, and also as early childhood educators to become informed, to know what this means for us in our everyday work with children and their families. So we're coming to the end of our really short conversation. I want to absolutely reassure our people online that Early Childhood Australia is thinking lots about what we do post the referendum. The work will, as we've heard from Joe and Adam, continue. One thing, Joe and Adam, that we might ask all of our educator colleagues, our professional colleagues and our friends out there to do now. So we've heard from both of you. We've reiterated how important it is to become informed. Is there some things that you would suggest people do as a result of our conversations today?
I think everyone has a sphere of influence. We all have it within our professional lives, within our personal lives, within our lives in community. I think where you have the opportunity to listen, be curious about what's being said, but also then provide the facts. And I also think one of the things that we can all do is reflect on our past, reflect on this nation's past, and think about this is an opportunity for us to bring about some progress and to walk together towards some type of equality in this country.
Thanks, Jo. Adam?
Stay informed. Do your best to read widely and deeply, as widely and deeply as you can in the next few weeks, and take your responsibility and your sphere of influence seriously, and be responsible in the way you speak, the way you are, in presenting your feelings about the referendum.
Thank you so much, Adam and Jo, for coming and sharing some of your thoughts with us. We're getting lots of all of the feels in the chat here of people thanking you for your contribution. We do appreciate that. This is a really tricky conversation, and for many of us, the skin in the game conversation, Adam, is different, and to be very mindful of that. And that's certainly resonated with many people, that idea of skin in the game. And also, Jo, your sphere of influence. A couple of people have sort of mentioned that they're thinking about what their sphere of influence is. We've got lots of people online who've made a commitment here, publicly, to say how they're thinking about the referendum. But again, we invite you all to take advantage of the various resources. Early Childhood Australia has some significant resources, has curated some resources for early childhood professionals. They'll continue to add to that and shape that conversation in the socials, but also on the website. We also absolutely encourage you to have a look at the process around being a part of a referendum on the Australian Electoral Commission. So if you want to know the details about that, I was talking to someone recently who didn't even know what a referendum was, because our understanding of that might be a little bit limited if we haven't been involved in one of those processes. But again, be really clear that Early Childhood Australia, alongside many other organisations in early childhood, has committed strongly to this as a firm commitment for yes, because of our commitment to Australia's children, and particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children having a stronger and more positive future set out for them as we continue past 2023 and beyond. Thank you so much, Adam and Jo, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And we wish you all the best as you enter into the next couple of weeks before the referendum. And please reach out to ECA and have a look at some of the resources. And again, thank you very much for your curiosities and your willingness to be a part of this conversation.